Welcome to Professor Sky's spam channel. Eventually, I'm going to release a video that is going to be outlining my theory of what I call the Boom-exer. I'm currently doing research on my generation's presence on Facebook, the way it presents itself, the way it weaponizes nostalgia, in the same way that the generation that preceded us, the boomers, have done. And what I want to do is I want to try to define what it is that makes this kind of regressive, nostalgic, fundamentally conservative thinking different for my generation, that is to say, people born between 1965 and 1980, around there. Like what does the form of rigidity that is characteristic of the okay boomer mentality, what form does it take? So as a prelude to that eventual video, which I'm quite excited to make, I want to talk about the HBO Max remake of the TV show Head of the Class. So part of being a Boom-exer, which I am not, like we are all sort of boomers inside of our hearts when we reach a certain age. We all have that kind of rigidity. But what I want to do is I want to try to establish what is it that makes someone rigid like that. It's a mistrust of change. It's a mistrust of change, and it's a certainty that things were better before. So when we think about the new head of the class, which I'll call the HBO head of the class, and the old one, it's pretty remarkable how jarring, how difficult it is for me, as a dude in his 40s, who remembers being a kid in his early teens and late childhood watching Head of the Class. It is unbelievably jarring to watch this shift. I mean, nothing that I have seen has been this jarring in terms of reboots and recreations. I don't care if He-Man puts less of an emphasis on certain traits. That doesn't really shock me, right? But this Head of the Class show is truly unsettling. Now let me break it down into its elements. So the idea behind Head of the Class, and one reason that I love it, and one reason that I'm a professor, is that it all takes place in a school. It's about the interaction between a teacher and their students. In the original, the teacher was originally played by an actor named Howard Hessman, who was made famous by the TV show WKRP. And he plays this kind of old, wise ex-hippie who works in a rundown inner-city school for all of the most advanced and the most intelligent kids. And he teaches a history class. And like any good show about teachers, it's about how he learns from them and about how they learn from him. And there's a great sort of clash of values as we have these kids of the 80s with someone from the 60s. It is sort of a boomer-exer conflict here. The new head of the class, there is no distinction between student and teacher whatsoever. It's now, instead of an old man, it is now a young woman, fresh out of grad school, with no life experience to speak of. Lots of education, but virtually no experience. So what made the initial show so engaging for me, and what part of made me want to be a professor, was that it's this idea of these kids who are the smartest kids in the school, who know the most, who have the most knowledge, who actually lack a lot of wisdom. And he brings that wisdom. In the new version, it's this young actress, who's perfectly good, by the way. All the actors are fine. There's no one annoying or bad on the show. But she is probably the same age as the kids around her. She is completely in their lives entirely. An early episode, she walks into the room and screams, "I don't like healthy boundaries." She speaks like them. She thinks like them. She has the same relationship to social media. She essentially has nothing to offer the students. And by consequence, the students don't have anything to offer her. It is really bizarre how this TV show represents the interaction between teacher and student. You'll notice I wear a suit. I usually wear a suit when I teach. My students don't call me Professor Sky, they call me Monsieur Payne. I try to have a very formal relationship. I'm not Facebook friends with my students. I don't hang out with them outside of class, because that's a boundary that has to be maintained. In this show, the teachers follow the kids on Twitch. The teachers will hang out with them at a cafe. The teachers will desperately try to win their approval in social settings outside of the classroom. It's all very bizarre and very unsettling. And it reminds you that the setting where we are in this whole thing is not really about education. It's just another show about a bunch of young people hanging around and delivering strange one-liners. There's only one other teacher of note, and he's just kind of a loser, but he's a nice enough character. There's a principal who's aloof. I would say that's one area where this new show is much better than the old one. The principal is much more engaging character. One of the main problems is that no one's learning anything. So what used to be a history class, which would allow this teacher to impart wisdom, is now a debate class. Except it's not debate. It's unbelievably frustrating because these students get together and it's like, global warming, what do you think? And then the students debate their own opinion. Like, that's not what debate club isn't about saying what you think. It's about learning how to make an argument no matter what you actually think. It's not how debate works. And basically every show, there is no debate. It's just sort of a bunch of young people kind of hanging around. Now let's talk about these kids. In some ways, the kids are actually less diverse than they were in the show in the 80s. Now, I know that's hard to believe, okay? I'll tell you why. There's a much better representation of sexual diversity, okay? There's at least one very out character, and his homosexuality is, or his bisexuality, I guess it's not quite clear, is really a central part of the show. And it's natural and it's easy, and it's part of the reason why I believe the Generation Xers will obviously be outshined and surpassed by Zoomers, who are obviously more intelligent and more accepting than my generation was, even if they do have shows like this. So on that aspect, it's there. But what's interesting is this cast is very racially mixed, but there's no culture. There's no signal of these other cultures. Some are African American, some are Hispanic, some are Asian, but they all talk the same, they all have the same interests, they're all just interchangeable. They're like different color emojis. Where in the original head of the class, although there was less representation, the characters that were there, there was one character who was from Southeast Asia and represented that. There was African American students who had to express their express themselves culturally and the situations that they went up against, with the exception of the character who is not straight. The only character whose identity is highlighted at all is the white cis male. And this is a weird thing where I don't think that anyone cares about the show enough to even get upset. But if all of the Nazis on the right wing knew about this show, they would be up in arms. Because it's a very bizarre thing that we have a totally racially diverse class, but there's no comment about anything, except every other episode there'll be some comment about how the white character is white, or how the white character is overconfident, or the white character is privileged, or the white character is kind of subtly evil. There's this weird sort of thing where this is the only person who's allowed in any way to be recognized for his difference. Under all of this is the lack of economic diversity. If I could say the biggest problem with this new show is Head of the Class, the original show from the 80s, was very engaging to me because it took place in a rundown, like maybe the Bronx or Harlem, like a rundown area. Like the school was dirty, the hallways were graffitied, the lockers were broken. The system was very much the system of Reagan's 80s, where public services were cut and people were in a terrible position socially, and there was no social safety net. And because of that, a lot of the struggles that the students had were economic, not just, not any other kind. In this new version, they just live in some random California void. The California void, where everybody is rich enough to do whatever they want. All the schools are beautiful and well lit. Every space is like the finest possible private school you've ever seen. Everyone just walks in and out. It's not really clear where they are in California. You learn eventually it's San Francisco, but it's just sort of this nowhere. This California America. This rich California America. This is the kind of setting which highlights the main difference between Head of the Class from the 80s and Head of the Class 2021, and that is this is not actually like a sitcom. It's a Disney show. It's a Nickelodeon show. Interestingly, the original Head of the Class is probably the reason why the new Head of the Class is so bad. Let me explain. The cast of the original Head of the Class didn't have many standouts. You had Howard Hessman. Everyone's great on the show. Robin Givens, who would go on to be with Mike Tyson, was famous for a brief period of time in the 80s. She does make an appearance here and there in the new show, which is nice. And then there was the overweight guy, the most cynical guy in the back, Dan Schneider. If you're familiar with Nickelodeon TV shows, this is the guy. This is the alpha and omega of Nickelodeon sitcoms. The creator or the showrunner for Kenan and Kel, iCarly, Victorious, Drake and Josh. That whole school of, to me, unwatchable programming for teenagers and for preteens, which nobody really talks in any real cadence. The essential thesis of every joke is, all right. You know, like that's the joke. It's just like someone doing something weird and then someone going, all right, whatever. It's not, to me, Boom-exer Sky over here doesn't particularly find this engaging. I don't like this. I forbid my kids from watching these kinds of shows. Now, I let my kids listen to NWA. I let my kids watch The Shining, okay? It's not like I don't forbid my kids from watching challenging culture, but this bad culture, I have forbidden them, primarily because it promotes a kind of communication which is so surface level and so based on a kind of superficial sarcasm that passes itself off for wit. So that's my thoughts on the new Head of the Class. But I gotta tell you something. I enjoyed watching it. I actually kind of like the characters. You know, like once I got over the fact that it shouldn't be called Head of the Class, you know, that this teacher has nothing to do, you know, like this teacher, she would never convince a young me to become a teacher, not the way Howard Hessman would. But who knows? Maybe she'll maybe she'll impress other people. The show does get better as the season goes on. There's a pretty good episode about phones, about the reliance on phones. It's done pretty funny. There's some like kind of interesting, kind of quirky storylines, which I don't think are absolutely terrible. But there you go. There's the first entry into my Boom-exer series. And of course, part of the whole Boom-exer thing is that like, what do we have to complain about? Everything that I liked when I was a kid is now the most popular thing in the world. You know what I mean? Like comic books and Star Wars. You know, like if that happened to me when I was growing up, I would have had to like endure like 11 The Shadow movies. And Wizard of Oz would have been on constantly. And I never would have been able to stop listening to Buddy Holly. Okay, enough thoughts. All right, well, until next time, have you seen Head of the Class, the reboot and the original? If you haven't seen the original, it's really worth a deep dive. It's really worth watching. It's a very funny, very engaging sitcom. And Howard Hessman is, in my opinion, one of the best sitcom actors that there's ever been. Okay. Oh, I should probably also mention Dan Schneider. That guy is also mired in a lot of allegations of inappropriate behavior. I don't know if he's been found guilty, but I should at least mention that. If you know more about that story, feel free to put it in the comments. Okay, well, until next time, I have to go. Oh my God, I have a meeting today from 3:30 until 5. I forgot about that while I was doing this video. No, there's the camera.